Hi guys, this is Hirosaki. This story is all about what if Naruto was a gamer between dimensions. When a boy wakes up in the world of Naruto with no memory of the past, foggy memories of the future, and a convenient gamer-like ability, so what's he to do? The only option is to get stronger and move forward. Before we start, kindly like and subscribe to this channel and look over the description box for the author of this amazing storyline. Welcome aboard! Chapter 20. I furrowed my brows in thought as I walked along a dirt path sandwiched by rows of trees on either side. She didn't have a mental block, Kushina stated in thought. But we didn't find any other seal on her either, so what caused her to force Kakashi to kill her? Minato paused in thought. Maybe we're thinking about this incorrectly. What if she had a seal but it was removed after she died? There are plenty of seals that have such a function, the Hyuga being such an example. The red-haired woman paused in thought before agreeing with a nod. Certainly, if that was the case, then it would make sense why we couldn't find one anywhere on her. But then that just begs the question. Minato began, his gaze serious. Who had the skill to place such a thing on her? It doesn't really make sense, I thought to myself as I continued on my way. If Kirigakure had someone who was skilled enough in Fuinjutsu to place such a cursed seal on Rin, why did they so willingly give up the Uzumaki scrolls at that time? That was what was bugging me. The conclusion Minato and Kushina had come to a few weeks ago had been that Rin had been implanted with a cursed seal that prevented her from saying anything and would only disappear when she died. Problem was, there was no one in Kiri with that skill, because if there was, they wouldn't have had such a difficult time deciphering the Uzumaki seal scrolls. Furthermore, when Kakashi has rammed his lightning blade through Rin's heart. Damn it, he removed it. Even after all the trouble we went through to get it. That was what the Kirigakure Umbu had said at that time. What could it have been referring to? Her heart? Doubtful. Therefore, it must have been something important enough for their plan that they would get upset over its loss. Such as, for example, a cursed seal that would control Rin to some extent. So that means Rin willingly let herself get stabbed in the heart in order to remove the seal that had been controlling her and preventing her from taking her own life. But that wasn't all. Kirigakure may have been played. There was someone skilled enough and powerful enough to manipulate Kirigakure into turning a foreign ninja into the three-tailed Jinchuriki while also simultaneously placing a highly complex cursed seal on the victim. The question is who? That was what had been bothering me since. The thought that there was such an individual out in the shadows was quite frightening and set me on edge. However, this was also merely conjectured. For all I knew, I was overthinking things and Kiri had simply found some wandering seal master and paid her to do the job. Still though, I shook my head. Even if I was right, what could I even do? As my senses came back to me, I paused as I finally noticed an abnormally large amount of chakra signatures gathered around the Hokage's building. Is the third making an announcement? Hey, Kakashi. I perked up at the mention of the name and looked ahead to see Kakashi sitting on a bench with a book in hand. Running towards him from my opposite direction was a boy with shiny black bowl-cut hair and bushy eyebrows. He wore a sleeveless jumpsuit with a scarf around his neck. I must have been really out of it if I hadn't noticed that they were in front of me earlier. Hey, Kakashi. Did you hear? The boy said before he paused in front of Kakashi and took the book he was reading. How a shinobi should die. What is this? Give it back. Kakashi replied before snatching the book back from the boy's hands. What's going on? Oh yeah. The spandex-wearing individual said, standing ramrod straight. The fourth Hokage was just announced. Ah, so that's what the fuss is about. At the mention of a new Hokage, Kakashi looked up from his book. Don't be surprised. The boy continued, before he paused, gripping his fists in excitement. The fourth Hokage will be Minato-sensei. Kakashi's eyes widened. I could sense a whirlwind of emotions going through him at that statement. Man, your sensei is amazing, Kakashi. Guy said with his eyes sparkling. At that moment, I stopped in front of them. Isn't that great, Kakashi? They both paused as they turned their heads towards me. Yoru. Guy looked between Kakashi and me before whispering to the one that was on the bench, who is he, Kakashi? A friend of yours? He's dash. Something like that. I said as I stepped forward, my name is Jordan, no surname. Most people just call me Yoru. Saying so, I stuck out my right hand. Guy blinked before smiling. Nice to meet you, Yoru. He said, vigorously shaking my hand before he stopped and took a step back before pointing his thumb to himself. My name is Mike Guy. Konoha's sublime green beast of prey and Kakashi's eternal rival. I see. I replied while lowering my arm and looking at Kakashi. I didn't expect that you'd go out of your way to make friends. Kakashi looked at me for a moment before replying, thank you. I tilted my head. Kakashi continued, if it wasn't for you, I would have broken my promise to Obito and lost someone close to me. For that, you have my thanks. Ah, that. The Hokage had allowed Kakashi to know that Rin was safe and alive just so that he wouldn't completely break down with the false belief that he had killed her. However, any mention of her being a Jinchuriki was kept hidden from him as per the Hokage's order. All he knew was that she was in a coma due to some sort of mental trauma and that she was being taken care of at a secure area. I looked at Kakashi for a moment, then at his book before turning to Guy, who was looking at the both of us in confusion. You said your name was Mike Guy, was it? Guy immediately nodded, that's right. I see, I know of you. At that, he rubbed his nose bashfully. I didn't know my reputation had made it this far. I continued, your father was Mike Dewey, the eternal genin. He stopped at that as his mood became despondent. Kakashi narrowed his eyes at me, Yoru dash. Why are you sad? I asked, causing Guy to perk up. Your father was a man powerful enough to kill 4 of the 7 ninja swordsmen of the mist while also causing the remaining ones to flee, however, this came at the cost of his life. I glanced at Guy more seriously, he sacrificed himself to save you, did he not? Guy's expression brightened before he nodded. And? How have you been honoring the life he gave up for you? Of course, I've been training harder ever since. Guy began as he gripped his fists, his eyes ablaze with passion. Father believed that one must have confidence in themselves in order to achieve anything. He believed that one's true youth only ended when one turned their back on their beliefs and joy. He pumped his fists up to the air. I believe that with more training, I'll become strong enough to protect what I love. This is why my youth will never fade. He then turned his flaming eyes towards me before yelling, Yash. I can feel the scalding passion of youth burning powerfully within me. I won't even able to calm down unless I run 1,000 laps around the village on my hands. Then do 10,000 push-ups on my thumbs. Then do 100,000 kicks with my legs. Yush. With that, he dashed down the path, licking up dust along the way. I looked at Kakashi, who was staring in the direction Guy had vanished to. If you want to truly honor Obito, then stop dwelling on your failures and sorrows. If you want to prevent that sort of situation from occurring again, then simply strive to improve yourself. Your friend has the right idea even if he is a bit excitable. Kakashi didn't reply as he continued to look to the distance. Well, that's all I can really be bothered to do. I thought as I began to walk away. Whether or not he took my words to heart was really not my concern. It's not like I care about him and Rin or anything. Yoru, gamer. A couple of months had passed after the announcement of Minato's ascendancy to Hokage. He had already been ushered into the job in front of the whole village about a month ago and had been met with overwhelming support and love from the village. He was a handsome, powerful, and charismatic individual with an impressive track record to say the least. His name sent fear tingling down the spines of his enemies, but to his allies, he was the most dependable individual. And at this moment, I was standing right in front of him, Kakashi by my side, as he looked at us with a slightly worried look hidden behind his impressive facade. We were in the Hokage office alone with him as he gazed at both of us seriously. My wife is pregnant. Ha! I know, I was the one who told you that a week ago. And it had been hilarious. I knew they couldn't help but go at it after that gooey display. I bet they still did it the same night I made fun of them for it. Minato blared at me before sighing in worry. In any case, I would like the both of you to watch over her during the duration of her pregnancy just in case anything goes wrong. Kakashi he began as he turned towards the person in question. You'll be watching her from the shadows. Think of it as pre-training before I allow you to join ANBU. Kakashi nodded his head. That said, the fourth Hokage turned his gaze towards me. You're already intimately familiar with how ANBU works, so I'll have you be with her in the light and follow her everywhere she goes. He then smirked, and you must oblige her every request. I froze, you. He nodded in satisfaction before leaning back in his chair. Well, that's all for now. Make sure my wife and our child stay safe for 10 months and be by their sides at all times appropriate. It shouldn't be a problem, right? He said that last part while looking at me. My eye twitched. So petty. He smiled once more. In that case, you're dismissed. With that, I left the room with a sour expression. Kakashi followed beside me before giving me a slight look of pity before going his own way. I sighed. I don't deserve this. Minato's POV. I watched in pleasure as Yoro left the room dejectedly before my face turned serious as I gazed at the new pieces of information on my desk. This is what the third meant when he said it would be my problem. I thought with a sigh before flipping through the report. Over the past few months, the 5 great villages have complained that some of their more prominent Kekkei Genkai users have gone missing without a trail. Jericho. From what I gathered about him from my teacher, Orochimaru, and Tsunade, he had been a frail and weak individual with no aptitude for being a shinobi. Because of his desire to fight side by side and be like the Sannin, he began to delve into forbidden experiments in order to fix his disabilities. The Chimera Technique. It was truly a terrifying technique, though the conditions and requirements to perfect it were quite stringent. However, if the conditions could be fulfilled, the user of the technique would be more than troublesome to defeat. I tapped the desk in thought. A friend of the Sannin. No wonder that name had sounded familiar to me at that time. Jiraiya had mentioned him once or twice, usually when he had been drunk. I closed my eyes. The 4 other great villages were not outwardly making any moves, but the tension from the Third Great War was still there and they were definitely not calm. The villages has been sending blames and threats to each other in response to this mess to the point where there were suggestions to hold a Kage summit. However, that wasn't the worst part. He used to be one of our own. Regardless of whether Jericho was now a missing nin or not, the other villages would still shift the blame to Konoha if it ever came to light that he had been responsible for this mess and had been a former ninja of the leaf. I narrowed my eyes. And there's the other issue. Rin. Her situation had already caused the other villages to be on edge, with even our ally Sunan shuffling uncomfortably. Having both the strongest tailed beast in addition to the 3 tails did not fare well with them. It was good that we had been able to set the narrative before Kiri had, however. The other villages probably still saw this as a power grab regardless of the message we sent. Combine this with the fact that one of our missing nin was kidnapping Kekkei Genkai users for power, it was plainly obvious what kind of issue we were in. I couldn't help but sigh. I can't believe Hiruzen left me with such a problem. Luckily, the third had already begun working on a plan for Jericho. As long as Orochimaru could find a weakness within the technique, then we wouldn't have too much of an issue dealing with the enemy ahead. I wasn't the most keen on letting him work on something like this, but he was the most qualified for the job. Besides, whenever Yoro was mentioned, he always became much more manageable. I didn't want to dwell on why that was, so I opted not to think about it. Now then. I looked at the large piles of paper on my desk. Those aren't going to finish themselves, are they? Yoru's POV. Day 1. I sat down across from Kushina in her home, eyes literally glowing, as I idly pet Mito's head as she sat down next to me in glee. Fun fact, the weak points that I saw through my deconstructive analysis also seemed to act as areas of pleasure if stimulated gently. Kushina looked at me intently before looking down and gripping her fists as if struggling to find the words to say. Finally, she took a breath. Yoru. She began as she looked back up to me. Before you begin to watch over me, I feel like as your teacher, I am obligated to tell you this. I continued scratching Mito's hair as her body swayed drowsily in comfort before I replied. Okay. Kushina's eye twitched. Would it be too much to ask for you to show some more expression? Can't you tell how hard this is for me to say? I tilted my head. You're the one making this difficult. You should know by now that regardless of what you have to tell me, I wouldn't think of you any differently. Her eyes widened before she smiled and coughed gently into her fist. She then looked at me seriously. Do you know what happened to all the tailed beasts during the first Hokage's era? Ah, this is what that's about. I nodded. The first distributed the tailed beasts to the 5 hidden villages as a sign of trust and peace. Why he thought that still eludes me to this day, but I continued nonetheless. Suna already had the 1 tails, Iwa gained the 4 and 5 tails, Kyomo gained the 2 and 8 tails, Kiri gained the 3 and 6 tails, and finally, we gained the 9 tails. Kushina nodded. That's right. The 9 tails was a special bijou and could only be contained within an individual with a strong life force, so the first Hokage's wife, Mito Uzumaki, fostered it. The Mito I was petting perked up slightly at the mention of her name through half-lidded eyes before she slumped down on the side of my chest. Kushina looked at that with a smile. She was a powerful woman and someone I respected a lot, so I named my daughter after her. Saying so, she continued on seriously. Of course Mito's life, like all others, was finite, and as she aged, so too did the seal containing the 9 tails. In order to prevent it from escaping and wreaking havoc, she had to pass on 9 tails to another vessel, and that vessel was me. Kushina completed while looking at me intently. After staring at her for a while and feeling her anxiety increase, I simply replied, I know dash. I know it's a lot to take in, and if you want to stay away from me, I understand, but please know that I still dash. She paused her rant and blinked before looking at me. Huh? So I replied, I know you have the 9 tails. She paused at that, looking at me with wide eyes, but how? And when? Unlike a general sensor, my ability to sense chakra is much more precise. When I first met you at the ramen store, my teacher could sense that you had too much chakra, but I could sense both that and the fact that you were hiding another well of chakra. One that was much, much greater and darker than your own. It wasn't the whole truth. I'd always known about her having the 9 tails, but it was true that my energy resonance was of a higher caliber in terms of quality than other sensory abilities. I had a shorter range, but I could sense energy more distinctly. Even the 9 tails chakra couldn't escape my detection, though the seal holding its chakra in place was very strong and I could only sense it when I was very close to Kushina. Kushina slumped back to her chair and stayed silent for a moment before asking, how come you never said anything? I figured you'd tell me when you were ready, and I never found it to be something worth noting. I stated before continuing. Besides, the 9 tails doesn't change the fact that you're my hot-tempered, beautiful, compassionate teacher. Kushina's eyes began to glisten before I suddenly found chakra chains wrapped around my body. Without warning, I was pulled into her hug as she rubbed her cheek against mine vigorously. I could feel the tears streaming down her face and decided not to complain about how unnecessary this all was. After a while, she let go of me and smiled while wiping her cheeks. Thank you. You're welcome. I replied before thinking to myself, this seems to be the best time to bring that up. I looked to Kushina's stomach before asking, when you were pregnant with Mito, you and Minato went to a secure place in order to give birth to her. I'm assuming that giving birth affects the seal holding the 9 tails in place, does it not? Kushina placed me down and chuckled before nodding. That's right. We went to a secret area that has a powerful barrier that will prevent anyone from coming in. The seal keeping the nine tails at bay has to be managed as it weakens while I'm giving birth. If it isn't, the nine tails could escape. I nodded my head in agreement. If that is the case, I want to suggest that you increase the amount of security protecting you this time around while you're giving birth. Kushina furrowed her brows. I suppose that won't be a problem, but may I ask why? I thought back to the image I had seen in that alternate reality. The nine tails going free. The destruction. The sadness. I have a bad premonition and I would prefer it doesn't come true. I looked at her deeply. Promise me that you'll take as much precaution as possible. The worst that could happen is that I'm simply wrong and I made you worry for nothing. I just can't shake this feeling. Kushina placed her hands on my shoulders before nodding with a smile. I suppose there's no harm in that, but that's 10 months away. She said before her smile became less amiable. Now then, what was that you said about me being hot-tempered? I truly believed you'd ignore that in the moment. She chuckled darkly before setting her legs in the table. I'm sure my husband let you know that I wanted my every desire followed without question. My eyes widened. You both schemed me. With a hat, she wiggled her toes. That's right, and now, I want a foot rub. And suddenly all the wonderful feelings vanished. All this time, Minato had been peacefully sleeping on the couch. Day 35. Ah! Isn't the air just so amazing out here? Kushina said as we walked around the village. I simply nodded in reply as I looked around at the hubbub of activity going around in the village. Stalls were set up as people tried to garner attention from the passerbys in order to sell their goods. Oh! Over there, Yoru! Kushina exclaimed happily as she ran towards the stall of Ichiraku's ramen store. I sighed and followed her in. Welcome! The owner said with a smile on his face. What can I get you? Kushina looked at the menu happily before stating, let's see, I'll have 5 bowls dash. 1. I said, cutting her off. She'll only have 1 bowl. She narrowed her eyes at me. What do you think you are doing? Making sure you eat healthy so that your child is born healthy. No more than 1 bowl per day. She furrowed her brows before giving a TSK, fine, make it 1 bowl of beef ramen dash. With extra vegetables. I concluded. This is for your own good and that of your child. She twitched her eyes, with extra vegetables. Tucci looked between the both of us and simply shrugged before turning his gaze towards me. And you? Figuring that it would be rude to come into his store and not order anything, I simply ordered the same thing Kushina had. Beef with extra vegetables. Didn't really matter what I put into my body, but I didn't want to tempt Kushina by picking anything else. After obtaining and eating our food, we paid and left the store and continued our trek down the busy afternoon road. I only got to have 1 bowl. Kushina complained with her head down. I inwardly rolled my eyes. My cabbages. I blinked and looked ahead only to see a cart of cabbages rolling down the street at high velocities. The owner of the cabbage cart could not keep up with the cart and pointed at it with tearful eyes. Someone, please stop my cabbages. The people on the road screamed and parted on other sides of the road as the cart traveled down towards us. Kushina watched the spectacle oddly while I simply sighed. You too. Watch out. The cabbage man said as the cart approached us. As it headed closer to us, I lightly tapped my foot on the ground, causing a wall of earth to erupt in front of us. The cabbage cart crashed into the earthen wall, worsened splinters and cabbages sent flying everywhere from the impact. Only after lowering the wall did I see the cabbage man crawling forward with his hands on his head in despair, and my cabbages. I took out a few 10,000 Rio and gave it to him. That should cover most of it, including the cart. The man blinked and shakily took the money before looking up at me with tear-filled eyes. Thank you. Yoru. Kushina said, looking at me, I wanted some of those cabbages. I ignored her. Day 70. Yoru. I want a sandwich. Kushina whined on the living room couch as I massaged her shoulders. I furrowed my brows. I'm afraid to ask, but what do you want on it this time? She licked her lips with a smile. Let's see, I want a tuna sandwich. I blinked. That's actually normal dash. Then I want peanut butter and jelly on it as well. And I spoke too soon. Also, I want spinach. I need to be healthy for my baby, you know. I stopped rubbing her shoulders and sighed. Is that it? She put on a thoughtful expression before brightening. Oh. How could I forget? Make sure you put on lots of pickles in it. My lips twisted in distaste at the thought of making such an abomination, but I had no choice but to nod in agreement. Fine, I'll go make your food. She giggled in glee, so I left to fulfill her twisted desires and headed towards the kitchen. With a few searches around the area, I was able to find all the ingredients that I needed. With the bread, spinach, peanut butter, jelly, tuna, and most importantly pickles, I had everything set for what was not even close to the most disgusting thing I'd had to make for her. I actually had a list in the deepest recesses of my scarred mind. I looked at all the ingredients and carefully combined them together in between the bread buns before I held the sandwich in between the palms of both of my hands. With a little bit of heat generated to both hands, I cooked the bread through and placed it on a plate. My nose crinkled at the nauseating smell of my creation. Good thing my cooking can make this thing palatable. With that, I brought the plate over to Kushina, who was waiting eagerly, and placed it down in front of her. Oh. I can't wait, she said heartily before immediately reaching in and grabbing the sandwich. With a single large bite, half of it disappeared as Kushina closed her eyes and slowly chewed on the sustenance. After a while, she swallowed and hummed and thought, Hey Yoru? Yes? She turned to look at me seriously. I don't know, but this one doesn't taste authentic. I raised a brow. Authentic? What do you even mean? Well, you know, she said while gesturing with her hands, it doesn't taste fresh enough. Kind of like it's been processed. That's how most food is though. And that's the problem, she complained. I can't have my baby eating this kind of junk. I sighed. Then what do you want me to do about it? Go around and get all those ingredients from scratch dash. I immediately regretted it as soon as those words came out of my mouth. Kushina beamed, yes. Pickles are literally processed to become what they are and take days to finish. What do you want time to do about that? I said, in an effort to dissuade her. She stopped to think for a moment before sighing. I suppose there's nothing to be done then. Just as I sighed in relief. Just don't add them in then, she completed. I froze. I hate my life. Well. Go on now, I'll be waiting. My eyelids twitched, so I promptly left the house and took a sigh before looking up to the barely rising sun. It was only around 6 o'clock in the morning, hence the reason why Mito hadn't been around us earlier, as she had been nicely tucked into sleep. The joys of being her age. Well, when I was her age, I was undergoing grueling and cruel training to become a killer, so I shook my head from those thoughts and went on to complete Kushina's insane requests. Minato was off doing Hokage business, and I could sense Kakashi near the house as he stood guard over it in order to watch Kushina. With that, I made my way over to a nearby lake after hopping across the village and stood at its bank. My energy resonance easily picked up the weak energy signatures of the fish below, so with a flick of my wrist, I impaled a tuna. After collecting my prize and putting it inside my inventory, I went over to the market area of Konoha and picked up some fresh berries before placing them in my personal pocket dimension as well. I didn't stop at that and also bought whole wheat grain, peanuts, and spinach. With that, I went back to Kushina's place and entered the door before quickly moving to the kitchen. Oh. Yoru, you're back. Kushina yelled from the living room. I'll be waiting here for my sandwich. I ignored her and focused on the matter at hand. Kushina already had yeast, so it was easy to activate it with some water generated from the molecules in the air. With that in addition to a little sugar and dough, I let it activate for a moment before I moved on to my next activity. This will be tricky, I thought as I looked at the whole grain and thought for a moment before getting a large container and placing a sufficient amount of whole wheat grain inside. After covering it up, I placed my hand on top of the container and really concentrated my chakra. I formed a very small swirling ball of energy within the container to grind up the whole wheat grain into fine flour for my usage. Next, I took some of the flour and put it in the activated yeast and mixed it with my raisingan once more until it had the consistency I desired. With that, I let it sit to the side. I wonder how Minato would feel if he found out that I was using his famous jutsu for cooking. The thought amused me greatly. While the dough was left to rise, I took out the tuna fish I had in my inventory and cleaned it up before filleting it into little pieces. After turning on the stove with the pan on top of it, I placed my fish inside and heard the amazing sizzle that I had been expecting. With some seasoning and olive oil, the smell was incredible. I sighed. I'm going to have to ruin this delicious dish. I decided that I would save some more Mito who had normal taste buds. With that, I used the same process for the peanuts that I used for the flour in addition to a little bit of oil and honey for flavor. Peanut butter complete. I checked on the fish and flipped it to its side before focusing on my jam. I crushed the strawberries and added them to a pan with sugar and lemon juice. I cooked it, transferred it to a covered jar, and began to process it in water. I checked back on my tuna and seeing as it was well done, I put it in my inventory for freshness. It took me approximately 2 hours to have everything prepared from having the bread dough rise and cooking it to finishing up making my jelly. With everything set up before me, I sliced up a couple of bread pieces and spread on some peanut butter and jelly before placing it in my inventory. Mito should be awake at any minute. Next, I did the same process once more, but in addition, I added the cooked tuna and spinach. Are you done yet? I'm hungry. I took a deep calming breath and walked out of the kitchen to the living room where Kushina was waiting for me expectantly once more. As soon as I placed the dish down, she grabbed and devoured it in a few seconds before sighing in contentment. Ah, that was good. She then yawned and laid down on the couch before waving me off. I'm tired now, so you can go do something else. And with that, she drifted off to sleep. I looked at Kushina's smooth neck. My fingers twitched. I took a breath and closed my eyes before shaking my head. I'll literally die if I tried. Yoru? Mito stated as she appeared in the living room while rubbing her sleepy eyes. Mommy's still sleeping? Ignore her, I said before walking towards her, picking her up, and sitting her down on the dining room table. At her confused look, I took out the peanut butter sandwich I had saved for her and placed it in front of her. Eat up, I made it all from scratch. Mito blinked before smiling widely. Thank you for the food. I rubbed her head before moving away and watching her eat my sandwich from a distance. Every bite she took caused her feet to swing subconsciously and her expression to brighten up with glee. She's too cute. Day 140. I was sitting down next to Kushina massaging her legs in the living room. I sighed to myself, I hope something happens soon that takes me away from this torture. That feels so good, Yoru. The redhead said in glee as she leaned back into the chair with her eyes closed. God help me. I felt a high-level chakra signature approach Kakashi, who was outside the house, before it promptly vanished. No sooner did Kakashi immediately move to the front door of the house and walk in with more emotion than I'd seen on him in years. Kushina stated as she peeled open her eyes and stood up slightly before asking the white-haired Jonin, Kakashi, what's wrong? He quivered slightly before saying, Rin, she's awake. The atmosphere froze. Kushina's eyes widened and she quickly stood up from the chair. We have to go there immediately. Internally, I thanked that deity that had answered my prayers. Now I could just stay here while they all went over to where Rin was kept. I could wait here until Mito came back from the academy, and if I was lucky, they would stay there the entire day and I'd have the house all to my. Kushina looked at me. Yoru. I felt a disturbing premonition. Yes? She grabbed my arm. You are coming with us. Let's go. The force of her grip prevented me from doing anything against her, and I was essentially kidnapped as she dragged me across the village. In no time, we arrived at the hospital where Rin was being kept before checking in with the nurses and making our way up to her room. Rin had been moved to the normal hospital some time ago after the then third Hokage had made sure there had been no leaks as to the identity of the Three Tails. Of course, the only individuals who had been allowed to interact with her had been Kazumona herself, who came by regularly to check on her mental state, and Tsunade, who checked on her physical health to make sure her muscles weren't being atrophied too quickly. There was no need to mention Minato, who came by occasionally to check on her seal. Kushina was too busy ordering me around to do so. Eventually, we stopped in front of a secluded room on the topmost level of the hospital. As Kakashi looked at the door with misty eyes, Kushina placed her arm around his shoulder in comfort. We'll go in together. Why do I have to be dragged into this? My things went unanswered as Kakashi nodded and pushed open the door. There in the room was the fourth Hokage himself, along with Kazumona, who was visibly more than halfway through her pregnancy, and Tsunade, all huddled around Rin's bed. The girl in question perked up at the sound of the opening door and looked towards us and smiled. I'm back. Kakashi stood there stock still as he gazed at her visage, his eyes slowly becoming misty in the process. Rin. He slowly walked up to the side of her bed and kneeled down before tears began to pour freely down his face. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. He muttered multiple times as he clenched his fists. Rin leaned to his side and wrapped her arms around Kakashi's neck before bringing him in closer to her. This was something I decided on myself, so please don't cry. That didn't stop the tears from streaming down his face as they stood there in silence. Well, I'm going to go before I ruin the mood, Kazumona stated as she supported herself and began to move out of the room. Her hand was suddenly grabbed by Rin. Thank you for everything you did for me. If it wasn't for you, I was simply doing my job, Kazumona said before she smiled, but you're welcome. With a smile, Rin let go, allowing Kazumona to exit the room. She gave me a gentle pat on the head and nodded to Kushina before leaving the premises. I was able to prevent her muscles from deteriorating too much, and by stimulating her motor nerve activity over these past months, I prevented her from forgetting how to walk. Tsunade began to explain to quietly Minato as she watched Rin. She'll probably still need a week or two to regain complete fine motor control, but she otherwise should be alright. Minato nodded and appreciated. Thank you for your continued help, Lady Tsunade. She lightly smiled. Of course, it's my duty after all. She then glanced at Rin once more. If there's nothing else, I will take my leave. Minato shook his head. No, I'll be handling everything else from here, you may take your leave. Tsunade nodded and left the room soon after. After consoling Kakashi for a little while longer, Rin looked up at me beaming. Yoru. She opened her arms to invite me into her embrace. While I was thinking about how to avoid this. Go on, Kushina said as she shoved me forward, the force propelling me straight into Rin's open arms. She quickly capitalized on the opportunity and wrapped her arm around my neck before quietly saying, "Thank you for saving my life and giving me a new heart." I think Kakashi flinched a little behind me. I was simply doing your job? Rin finished with a smile. Iso-kun told me that if it wasn't for you, even he wouldn't have been able to save me. I paused at the strange name. Iso-kun? I asked. I turned around to see that everyone else here was as confused as I was. Rin nodded heartily. I prefer not to call him this, but he's the Three Tails. Pin. Drop. Silence. Kakashi looked at Rin in surprise. Rin, what are you ? Minato cut him off with a sigh as he looked at Kakashi. I suppose it's unfair to keep it from you. I'm sure you want to know why she did what she did, so I'll have her explain. He looked to Rin, if you don't mind? Rin shook her head and released me before saying, I don't really remember where I was taken to as I was blindfolded along the way, however, I only know that they sealed Isokuin into me. She paused for a moment and continued, I knew that they had deliberately lowered their security after Kakashi easily tracked and broke me out of the place I had been kept in. From what I remember, the moment I got into Konoha, Isokuin would break free and most likely rampage across the village, causing a lot of destruction to us. She then blinked and smiled. Isokuin says that he wouldn't bother doing something so troublesome. Kakashi's eyes were wide as he asked, then why did you jump in front of me? As long as Sensei and his wife were around, they could have easily prevented that. Rin shook her head. They placed a curse seal on my heart that prevented me from telling you anything about it and also prevented me from taking my own life. She looked at him in remorse. I apologize for forcing you to do that. I just didn't want Konoha to be destroyed. At Kakashi's silence, Kushina asked the question that had been most on my mind. Wait, why do you call the Three Tails Isokuin? Do all the bijou actually have names? Rin nodded. His name is Isabu and he's actually quite nice. He never really meant to hurt anyone, however being forced into people for many years soured his mood. Also, she began, pointing her finger at Kushina's stomach, he says to tell his big brother he said hi. Kushina's eyes widened. Minato slapped the side of his face. Kakashi looked confused. Big brother? What does that mean? Don't worry about it. Minato said in exhaustion as he looked at Rin with a strained smile. In any case, you are alright now, so get some rest. I'll be checking up on you periodically to make sure everything is alright. Rin nodded readily before looking at Kushina. Thank you so much for coming, Kushina-san, and congratulations. She finished while focusing on Kushina's protruding stomach. Ah. You're just so cute. The redhead stated as she approached and embraced Rin for a moment. Get some rest, will you? Rin nodded. I will, thank you. Kushina supplanted a kiss on her forehead before grabbing my arm and Minato's arm and dragging us out of the room. You two catch up, she said to Kakashi and Rin before she closed the door behind her. With that, she took a breath before looking at Minato. What do you think? About the fact that the tailed beasts are highly intelligent creatures? About the fact that they have names? About the fact that they are related? Or about the fact that there's someone there with enough skill to place that kind of curse tag on her? Yes, I replied. They shot me a look before ignoring me. Kushina sighed. I never even considered the thought that the Ninetales was intelligent. It had always been explained to me as a monster. I blinked. You never tried to talk to it? Not even once? She smiled sourly. Well, I usually just went to yell at it whenever I was having a bad day and then I would leave soon after. I've never actually tried to communicate with it. I raised a brow. Minato sighed. In any case, Rin and the Three Tails seem to have a good relationship, so I'm not worried in that end, however. He looked at Kushina's stomach while scratching his chin. I had no idea they could sense each other at close distance. Are you planning on talking to it? Kushina's lips twitched. With the type of seal that's been used on it and considering how long it's been with me, I'm not really sure it'll want to have a conversation. It's worth a try, I began. The worst it could do is straight out ignore you, or roar at you, and curse you, and taunt dash. I think I get the point, Kushina replied before sighing. In any case, with Rin back we can rest a little easier. That's right, the Hokage replied before planting a kiss on Kushina and rubbing her stomach. I'll be home soon, but for now, I'll be a little bit busy. Say hi to Mito for me. Kushina looked up at him brightly. Of course. Minato smiled and patted my head as he walked by before disappearing into the distance. As she watched Minato disappear, she grabbed my arm. When we get home, I'm going to try talking to the fox. How hard could it be? Day 280. Motherfew dash. I covered Kushina's mouth as I sensed Mito's chakra signature at the door. I don't think that's the kind of language you should be using when your daughter is close by. She glared at me before taking a deep breath and grinding her teeth, but this stupid fox is so infuriating. Every time I try to talk to him, it just ridicules and laughs at me, then it starts to insult Mito Uzumaki, the first Hokage's wife, and then me and then my clan, ARG. It sounded like there was much more she wanted to say, but she held her breath as Mito's footsteps approached. "Mom, Yoru, I'm home," Mito yelled excitedly as she approached us with a skip in her step. I scratched her head while she gave me a hug before she moved on and embraced her mother. Kushina gave her a motherly smile. "Welcome home, Mito. How was the academy today?" Separating herself from her mother, Mito answered, "It was the same as usual. Basic drills and kunai accuracy tests, but, oh." She suddenly exclaimed as if she remembered something, "Today the teacher in charge taught me about human vital points and how to best target them." "Oh?" Kushina said with a raised brow. "What did you learn then?" Mito searched for a moment before pulling out a dull wooden kunai and gripping it. "Well, he said to hold it kind of like this. And then she brought the point up to let mother's neck and attack here." Kushina shook her head slightly and gently grabbed Mito's arm before adjusting its positioning. She then shifted her legs a little to give me a more stable balance. "First you want to aim for the jugular where the blood travels up to the brain. As long as you can get a solid nick in, the enemy will spill blood all over." Mito's eyes widened before she nodded excitedly. Kushina smiled at her daughter's enthusiasm and continued, "Next, you want to push into your enemy slightly and get them off balance so that you can restrain them." Mito nodded once more. Kushina began to fix Mito's flaws and explain to her efficient methods of killing while I just listened in interest. All the best ways to target the heart, throat, lungs, groin, and brain while also properly handling her weapon. I idly wondered if this was what a normal family was like. I looked outside at the afternoon sky and thought for a moment. It's been a little quiet as of late. I wonder if some new development will pop up. Before I forget, I heard Kushina say as she looked at Mito seriously. "Tomorrow there's supposed to be a solar eclipse and I might forget to remind you then, so I'm doing it now. Whatever you do, don't look up at the sun, alright?" She rolled her eyes. "I know, Mom, I'm not dumb." Kushina began to roughly pinch her daughter's cheeks, causing "Cheeky kid." Mito girl to groaned and rubbed her cheeks in protest. Suddenly, the door to the house was opened and Kakashi came in with an intensely serious look on his face. "Yoru, you need to come outside and look at this." I blinked. "Kakashi, what's wrong?" Kushina asked. He shook his head. "I don't really know how to explain it. In any case, come outside." I furrowed my brows and looked to Kushina. She nodded and grabbed her daughter's hand. "Let's take a look." As soon as we went outside and looked at the direction Kakashi was looking at, I finally understood the urgency. Up in the sky in the distance, a large image of a young white-haired boy was being projected. It was the image of a boy with white-haired and red eyes dressed in an oversized, high-collared coat wrapped with 3 leather straps, and he had bandages on his up to his nose. "My name is that of a ninja from the Hidden Leaf Village, Jericho." The projection began. I grimaced. Did I jinx this? Chapter 21. Using our Chimera Jutsu, 4 of the Kekei Genkai from each of the great ninja villages are already mine. The gargantuan projection of Jericho explained as he continued to monologue his entire plan. "He has 4 already, that's probably not good. When I obtain the 5th and final Kekei Genkai, I will become invincible, a perfect immortal ninja." Why is he telling us his grand plan? Isn't that just inviting everyone to stop him? Wouldn't it be better to just obtain whatever he needs quietly and then take over the world? Was I the only one with these thoughts? With that power, I will descend the shinobi villages into a great ninja war and I will rule over everything. With his message delivered, the projection vanished from the sky. There was a moment of silence. Kushina narrowed her eyes. If I wasn't 10 months pregnant right now, I would personally go out and smack his face. Kakashi continued to focus his forlorn gaze in the distance. We've just suffered through a great ninja war, yet he wants to drag us into one again. There wasn't much anyone else could say at that statement. Suddenly I perked up. Mito smiled, Dad. Minato patted his daughter's head before he looked at me gravely. I'm going to assume you already know the situation. I nodded, it was kind of hard to miss. I looked to the distance where Jericho had set up his projection. Rin's situation was already complicated enough, but now this. Minato sighed while gently running his hands through his hair, even after all the effort we made to block any information about him. I didn't think he'd have such a technique that would screw us over. And now the other nations are going to be at our front doors. I stated. What about our relationship at Suna? Kakashi asked. Minato smiled wryly, they'd been on edge since they found out we gained possession of the Three Tails. At this point, the most we can hope from them is that they don't try to attack us. Kushina sighed deeply, all this stress is not good for my baby. You all better figure this out in the next few days, because I won't bring my child into another shinobi war. Don't worry. Minato began with a smile, we'll figure this out. You can count on me. He concluded while gently stroking Kushina's face. As she closed her eyes and leaned into his touch. Am I going to get another sibling after? Mito asked innocently. Minato and Kushina froze before they stared at me. I blinked, you can't blame this on me. Minato just shook his head and looked at me before saying, come with me to my office. I'll explain to you and a small group of others our plan. He then turned his gaze to Kakashi before saying, continue on with your duty. Kakashi nodded. With that, Minato placed a hand on my shoulder before our surroundings shifted and warped in my view. Not only that, but I now sense 3 familiar and powerful chakra signatures inside the Hokage's office. Oh. You brought the little one in here too, Minato? Jiraiya's voice rang out soon after our appearance. Minato nodded before sitting on his chair. That's right, it's easier for me if you are all here right now. I decided to move around his table and face the Hokage alongside the 3 Sannin. Seeing this, Minato then continued. Over the past year or so, the previous Hokage and I have been gathering intel on Jericho and the inevitable scenario that we would have to confront him. He then exhaled lightly. We hadn't thought the situation would be this large, but regardless, a few days ago, we were able to locate his whereabouts. Jiraiya furrowed his brows, that's a little convenient? Minato completed with a smile. That's what I was thinking as well, however, the trail of his most recent victims ends there and it's the only lead we have. So? Tsunade began. Where exactly is our body-stealing friend hiding out? Minato nodded. The intel says that they found a base at Inishumasen in the Korin range on the border of the Hidden Stone Village in the Land of Earth and the Hidden Grass. I remember that area, it was around where my very first mission took place, and where I killed someone for the first time, good times. Minato continued. The scouts fought against odd chimeric beasts, not unlike the ones that are in your lab right, nor Orochimaru. They were, however, more stable and seemed to be more complete and stronger versions of the ones Jericho had been working with in the past. The man slightly narrowed his eyes in intrigue. Fascinating. Our next course of action then? That's why you are all here. Minato said before looking at Tsunade, in preparation for the encroachment of enemies on our borders, I would like you to delegate Medic Nin to the field in correspondence with the number of shinobi we already have out there. I'll have information about our deployment delivered to you. Understood, Lord Hokage. Minato scratched the back of his head, you don't have to be so respectful, you know, just Minato is fine. You 3 are still my seniors. You calling me old? Tsunade said with a glare. Minato blinked, well no dash. Jiraiya coughed, gaining Minato's attention and preventing Tsunade from responding in turn and derailing this meeting into something meaningless. With that Minato strained a smile before adopting a serious countenance and gazing at Orochimaru. Have you found a weakness to his ability? He grinned, I have, but I need just a few more hours to complete it. Trust me when I say that it will be very effective. Minato nodded, seemingly relaxed a little bit, before he gazed at Jiraiya. Sensei, I'll have you watch the border between us and Sand and try to delegate. I don't want us to break ties with them if possible. Jiraiya rubbed his chin. That will be just a bit tough. With this situation and that other one, it'll be difficult to calm them down. I know. Minato said. And that's where Yoro comes in. I blinked. Me? He nodded. I have a specific mission for you that will more than likely halt any thought of invasion from Suna and may allow us to even gain their help. At this, the rest of us were intrigued. To put so much faith in him. Jiraiya said, rubbing his chin and looking my way before smiling. Well, what's this special mission you have? Do you all recall that the third Kazekage disappeared a couple years back during the war? Minato asked. Jiraiya's eyes instantly widened, causing the visions of Tsunade and Orochimaru to be surprised. Well. Tsunade began in irritation. Don't just leave us out of the loop. Jiraiya actually ignored her and looked at Minato seriously. Do you think he can handle this alone? Minato looked at me, to which I simply looked back at him cluelessly. He smiled. Maybe not, but I plan to have him bring someone along if he feels the need to. Jiraiya closed his eyes in thought and nodded for a moment. I see. I would really appreciate it if you both allowed me to understand what you were talking about. The blonde Sannin said with a frown. Minato explained, to be honest, the third Hokage and I had somewhat planned for the scenario in which Jericho's ties to us were found, so at the very least we thought of how we could keep Sand on our side. We figured that we could find the person they had been looking for after all these years and at least prevent them from moving against us. I was tasked with finding any information about the third through my extensive network, and only through some chance was I able to come up with a name. Jiraiya spoke gravely. Sasori of the Red Sand. Orochimaru narrowed his eyes. What does the puppeteer have to do with the third Kazekage's disappearance? Apparently, everything. Jiraiya stated. During one of his excursions, he was seen with a puppet that was using the third Kazekage's magnet-style iron sand. It was in a remote country, so the news likely wouldn't have ever made it over here to the elemental nations if not for my web barely reaching that far. Tsunade raised a brow and looked at Minato. I see what you're thinking. If we can get the third Kazekage's body back for Suna, they'll be more than likely grateful enough to step back. However, you're going to have him face off against someone who could take down someone of the third Kazekage's caliber? Minato shook his head. The mission objective is to primarily secure the Kazekage's body, not to collect a bounty. As long as the body is secure. Minato stated before pulling out of his tri-pronged kunai. Then I can just pick him up. Saying so, he handed it to me. Ping. Quest alert. Red Iron Sand. Based on Jiraiya's intelligence network, it has been found that Sasori of the Red Sand is in possession of the third Kazekage's corpse. Your duty is to retrieve it safely and intact in order to return it to the hidden sand village. Reward, 250,000 EXP. Failure, death. I should be able to handle it. I stated as I took the weapon. But I'll probably need a little backup. If I went alone and faced such an opponent, I didn't doubt I could win if I decided to say fuck it and just blow myself and my opponent up, but that would probably also destroy the mission objective. With that said, I looked at the Hokage. If Itachi is still in the village, I'll use his assistance. The Hokage agreed to my request. I'll see to it. He then looked at Jiraiya. Hold on just a moment. Tsunade said as she centralized her vision on me. A team is not complete unless it has at least one medic nin. You don't think I'll let you leave with only one other person, do you? When Tsunade had officially returned to the village a couple of years ago, as a result of yours truly, she had brought with her a variety of reforms for the current team system in Konoha. It was mandatory for the shinobi with the best chakra control of the graduating classes to take intensive medical training classes. This had also helped reduce our casualties during the war in the long run. That being said, I should be able to heal myself if dash. No, she said simply, cutting me off. While your ability can heal bodily injuries quite effectively, that's its only purpose. You have little official training as a medic nin. What will you do if you are drugged or poisoned? Or you become infected with something unknown? I paused for a moment. Well, my body is resistant to poisons dash. Resistant? She asked with a raised brow. But not immune? My point then still stands. Besides, I'm pretty sure that Itachi doesn't have your body, so if you plan on taking a partner with you on this mission, you'll go with a full team of 3. I could see that she wasn't really going to budge on this. I wasn't sure if it was because she cared for me, didn't want me to die, or because she liked her rules followed. Regardless, I nodded in agreement. Alright then, who do you suggest I take with me? Rin. Tsunade said. Minato considered. Are you sure that's the best decision? Why not? The blonde Sannin rhetorically asked. Kiri doesn't know who she is, only that she exists, and with that there's no one else from the other nations who would be able to identify her. Furthermore, I've been teaching her everything I could during these past 5 months. She'll be able to handle herself well enough. That also reminds me. She looked at me. I think her control is enough for your seal. Minato nodded. I'll trust your judgment on this. Now then, Sasori of the Red Sand? He asked, looking at Jiraiya. The white-haired man sighed before adopting a serious expression. From my reports, Sasori was last spotted around the ruins of the city of Roran. Possibly to look for more puppet parts, or because of the scenery, but I can't be sure. Minato suddenly frowned. I sealed off the Ryomayaku vein of that city, so he shouldn't be there for that at the very least. He shook his head before looking at me. Alright, now that you know where to go, you can start preparing. I'll have someone contact Itachi. I nodded. If he declines, then don't worry too much about it, I'll probably be fine regardless. If Sasori did make a human puppet out of the third Kazekage, it was likely weaker than the original. Factoring in my abilities, I should be able to scrape a win even if I was alone as long as I played it smart. Though there was also the fact that he had been able to kill the third Kazekage in the first place. Here. Jiraiya stated before tossing me a scroll he had puffed from his storage seal. That's all the information my spies have been able to gather, including his disguises and some of his abilities. It's not much, but it should help you a little bit. I slightly bowed in thanks before storing the scroll. Alright, you all are dismissed. Minato stated. I nodded before adding. Let my partners know that I'll be at the front of the gate. Minato nodded. They'll know. I bowed, then I left. Yoru, gamer. I leaned on the wall next to the large exit path that would lead me out of Konoha and looked at the blank space in front of me. Name, Yorodon. Race, human. Age, 10.99 years old. Level, LVL 96 next level, 258700/471000. HP, 397201/397201 Regen, 10,923 per min. CP, 633076/633076 Regen, 23,740 per min. CC, 100%. STR, 493, 292%, equals 1,440. VIT, 497, 292%, equals 1,451. Dex, 495, 292%, equals 1,445. Int, 385, 300%, equals 1,155. WIS, 380, 300%, equals 1,140. NG, 400, 492%, equals 1968. Points, 235. Rio, 6,355,348. I wasn't really sure what would be the most appropriate distribution of points for the coming mission, but I would be damned if I didn't get my first 3 stats to 500. Ping. Due to your STR reaching 500, your skill, Dense Muscles 2, has evolved to Dense Muscles 3. Dense Muscle 3, Passive, LVL Max. Dense Muscle is a skill given to those with overwhelming strength. The denseness of your muscle increases greatly, allowing you to suffer less damage from physical attacks. Increased durability equal to your STRX5 value. Due to your VIT reaching 500, your skill, Thick Skin, has evolved to Thick Skin 2. Thick Skin 2, Passive, LVL Max. Thick skin is your body's natural outer defenses that depend upon your maximum HP value. It increases your final durability equal to 5% of your HP value. DUR increased by 5% HP. Due to your DEX reaching 500, your skill, Hawkeye's 2, has evolved to Hawkeye's 3. Hawkeye's 3, Passive, LVL Max. Hawkeye's 3 is a skill granted to those with incredible natural vision. With this ability, every point the user has in Dexterity X5 is a meter-long increase to their natural vision range. It also allows the user to see in the dark. I.e. a DX stat of 200, including bonuses, would increase your maximum vision range by 1,000 meters. Beautiful. I thought to myself as I gazed at the perfectly even numbers. My next course of action was to blow away 115 stat points on INT since it had been hard to make it in WIS catch up to my first 3 stats. ENGY was a non-issue since the passive multipliers I got for it were immense. Ping. Due to your INT reaching 500, you have gained the skill, Parallel Processes. Parallel Processes, Passive, LVL Max. Parallel processes allows your brain to simultaneously process 2 completely different sets of information. One part of your brain is almost completely independent of the other and can work subconsciously while the other part works consciously. When both parts of your mind focus on a singular task, your processing capabilities are quadrupled. Immediately, I could feel an alien phenomena occur within my mind as something akin to a second brain seemed to form. I looked around the world, my mind taking in and processing information at a pace much more rapidly than I had ever done before. Neat. I thought to myself before another thought came to mind. I'll have it work on that other project for now. The project in question was one that would significantly increase Mito's life expectancy when completed. As soon as I delegated the role to my new mind, I immediately felt a sense of loss as my processing capabilities returned to normal. I gave myself a moment to readjust before I focused on the screen in front of me. With only 105 stat points left, I put 20 into WIS to give it an even 400 and closed my screen. With that, I took out the scroll Jiraiya had given me and read through the contents. Roran ha? Roran was a kingdom surrounded by a desert in the land of wind. Now, it was simply a city in ruins. I didn't really know the specifics because I had been off on a mission at the time, but I knew that Minato had sealed off the city's chakra vein after defeating some idiotic megalomaniac who had planned on using it to take over the world. I halted my thoughts and put down the mission scroll before looking in front of me. You decided to come. Itachi looked at me plainly before nodding. I internally sighed. Some time ago on a simple escort mission, Itachi had lost both of his teammates. The escort had been slaughtered as well, their bodies staining the grass with blood. I didn't know the specifics like who attacked or why, but ever since then, he'd been a lot quieter. Yoru! A feminine voice exclaimed from the distance. I turned my head and gazed at Rin's quickly approaching figure as she waved at me while smiling. In but a few moments, she arrived in front of Itachi and me. I scanned her up and down for a moment before commenting. You seem to be in good health. She nodded. It's all thanks to Lady Tsunade's treatments, but of course I would have never had the opportunity if not for you. With a light smile and a nod in her direction, I faced both her and Itachi. We'll be working as a team, so we'll need to know each other. Rin, Itachi. Itachi, Rin. The brown-haired girl smiled at Itachi before slightly bowing. Nice to meet you, Itachi. I look forward to working with you. Likewise. He quietly replied with a bow. Next up, here is the mission detail. I said, giving them the scroll to look at. Rin opened it and Itachi stood next to her as he observed from behind. Our first mission is to confirm if Sasori of the Red Sand has what we are looking for. If not, we won't engage and will go on our way, hopefully avoiding detection. If he does have what we want, however, we'll have to engage and retrieve it. The third Kazekage's corpse. Itachi said before looking towards me. Is this about that projection? Among other things. I said. We'll be heading out to the ruins of the kingdom of Roran. Any questions? Itachi said nothing while Rin simply rolled the scroll back up and handed it to me. Seeing this, I nodded. Alright then, but before that. I looked to Rin and grabbed her hand. Lady Tsunade says you're ready, so what design do you want? She blinked for a moment before she smiled in remembrance, a turtle. I didn't bat an eye at the odd request as there had been some really weird ones in the past. With that, numerous lines of Fuinjutsu script covered her body from our point of contact. In but a moment, the script began to coalesce onto the back of her hand before a realistic green turtle was displayed on it. Rin raised her hand to the sky and marveled at it before suddenly hugging me. Thank you. Isokuin says he loves it. No worries. Was my reply, after which she separated from me. I ignored Itachi's questioning look as he looked between Rin and I. Was he smirking? Before I placed a hand on both of their shoulders. Unbeknownst to both of them, or perhaps they both knew, but it didn't matter anyway, I formed a Fuinjutsu seal on both of their bodies. With that complete, I looked to them before saying, let's move. We were right next to the gate, so after showing our mission statement, we were quickly let through. Yoru, gamer. I stood in the front and center of our triangular formation as we traversed through the forested terrain that made up most of the Land of Fire. You know, I always found it ironic that the Land of Fire was surrounded by trees. The land of Earth was, well, I guess surrounded by dirt. The Land of Wind was a desert and very windy. The Land of Lightning was up in the clouds, pretty literally, so it made sense. And the Land of Water was quite aptly surrounded by water. The Land of Fire, however, only had trees. Not even an active volcano was around here. Did no one else ever find that strange? We should be arriving close to Amigakure soon. I said out loud. I didn't need to look back as I felt their agreement at my statement. From what I knew, the village hidden in the rain was in the middle of a civil war of sorts, and so it was important that we moved around the outskirts of Hidden Rain. The only reason we were going through this area was due to the fact that rain acted as a buffer between sand and Konoha and was the quickest way to our destination. It was inevitable, however, that we would have to pass through some of the smaller villages that were located around the Hidden Rain's territory, so as we approached one such village, I began to slow down, my teammates following suit. We'll make a quick pit stop here before we move on. I explained. We weren't really tired, but since we were here, I figured we could take a little moment to pause before continuing on with our mission. We landed on the ground and walked out of the forest before beginning to make our way towards the gate of the village. It was then that I furrowed my brows. Odd, the security is lax. Even if this village wasn't a part of the Hidden Rain Civil War, I expected that it would at the very least increase its security, especially due to its proximity to rain. Well, it's not my problem. I thought as I entered the village. My teammates and I walked along the paved dirt road of this small town while I looked to and observed the people here. There's little to no tension. I observed. Another thing I noted was that some of the individual in the area was staring at us with whispers. I couldn't say it was hostile, but it certainly wasn't friendly. I closed my eyes and focused on my ears in order to hear what they were talking about. Shinobi from the leaf. What are they doing here? Projection in the sky. Humph, as long as God is in hidden rain, what can Konoha do? Angel of God. I stopped concentrating and furrowed my brows, especially at the last two statements. God? I haven't heard anything about that in the hidden rain, but then again, they are quite isolated. As I noticed the visions of the people around us getting less hospitable, I looked to both Itachi and Rin and grabbed their forehead protectors before taking them away. Itachi. No more needed to be said as his eyes transformed into his clan's signature bloodline limit. Soon after, the individuals surrounding us suddenly started to ignore us as if we weren't there. I nodded. Let's quickly depart, it seems like our presence isn't welcome. There was no disagreement as we quickly exited to the other end of the village and continued on with our travels. Yoru? I heard Rin ask behind me. I slightly turned my head to her. What's wrong? My headband. She commented with a smile as she scratched her cheek. Right. I said as I took them both out and handed them back to their respective owners. Rin took hers with thanks before stating, I have never seen you with your shinobi headband on. Itachi slightly perked up as well, so I answered, it reflects the light, making whoever wears one a shining beacon that screams kill me please. At night it's not so bad, but I still don't bother wearing it. Rin and Itachi paused and looked at each other before slowly putting their headbands away. With that, there were no more distractions as we quickly traversed through the forest before the environment began to change. The trees became more sparse as the soil became less fertile and more grainy as we began to approach Wind Country's borders. Before long, we found ourselves surrounded by sand, signifying that we had arrived at Wind Country. I looked to the sky, noting the position of the sun in relation to us, before I mentally conjured the map of the area. As long as we continue moving southwest, we should make it soon. Itachi and Rin nodded in agreement, so we continued our movements. In but a few moments later, we finally arrived at our destination. In front of us, a magnificent city of towers surrounded by a metal wall. The architecture of the area was exquisite, with the tall metal towers gleaming in the afternoon sun. Some of the buildings were tilted or had fallen down due to the aftereffects of the war, yet the city retained its charm. So, this is that place, Rin said as she idly took in the architecture. Kakashi told me he went on a mission around here with Sensei. I walked forward into the city gates, signaling the others to follow. Nothing of note really happened at that time. Wasn't someone trying to take over the world? Itachi asked skeptically. You get those kinds of people from time to time, I replied. As a matter of fact, the elemental nations are currently dealing with one such individual at this moment. Like every other idiotic megalomaniac, he'll die as well. Suddenly, I stopped and held out my hand. I listened. Do you too hear that? Itachi and Rin stood on guard as they focused on their surroundings and began to look every which way. I can't dash, Rin began before she immediately paused. I narrowed my eyes. Jump. Without a moment's hesitation, Itachi, Rin and I leaped up to the top of the closest tower just as the ground beneath burst open, 3 large bodies puppets spilling out from the gap. They were humanoid-shaped puppets that seemed to be modeled after Dogu. Before I could contemplate further, the puppets suddenly launched towards jet boosters propelling their flight. I sharpened my gaze. Move. No more needed to be said as we all jumped to other buildings just before the puppets released powerful chakra lasers from their mouth. The building we had previously occupied was easily vaporized, the ashes and debris falling downwards due to gravity. The 3 puppets then turned, each one facing one of us, before they attacked. I focused on my enemy as it charged at me before it suddenly launched kunai from its hips. I took out my own and easily deflected them before hopping back a few paces as I found that they were following me. I took a deep breath. Fire style, majestic destroyer flame. White flames of immense heat poured out of my mouth and engulfed the projectiles as they fired off towards the puppet. An explosion sounded out on the battlefield. The puppet I had been facing was charred black as it tumbled in the air before crashing to the ground. No sooner did a couple more explosions sound out through the battlefield before I saw Itachi and Rin standing on different buildings. We looked at each other before nodding. I suppose those were flawed pieces of art. I widened my eyes at the sudden voice before hopping back a few steps and jumping up to the building Rin was on. I focused my senses and felt a powerful chakra signature thinly linked to certain objects that were all around us. There's no point in running. The voice said, closer this time. Once I'm done unearthing the masterpieces located here, I'll turn you all into immortal pieces of art. Before I could find the source of the chakra, the ground began to tumble and shake before hundreds of puppets emerged from below. The streets were densely packed with the metal automatons, half of which took up to the air. This looks problematic, Rin states wryly. I shook my head. We simply have to even the odds. Shadow Clone Jutsu. I divided my chakra into 210 parts and gave rise to 210 clones of myself, each with only around 3,000 units of chakra. But it was enough. My clones jumped down from their higher vantage point while simultaneously forming a swirling ball of blue chakra on their palms. The Rasengan only cost as much as a B-rank technique despite its power being S-ranked, however, if I had divided my clones any further, they would not have been able to use it. As these thoughts filtered through my mind, my clones attacked. Rasengan Barrage. The ground below lit up with a magnificent blue glow as each of my clones' Rasengan made contact with the enemy puppets. The shockwave from the attacks quickly dispelled them and caused powerful winds to surge in all areas. Itachi and Rin partially covered their eyes from the gale force winds while I kept mine peeled in search. After the wind died down, Itachi asked, was it even necessary for us to come? I nodded. I'm out of chakra with that stunt. I'll be out of commission for just a moment. With that, I sat down and activated meditation. To be honest, I wasn't completely out of chakra, but I wanted to see what they could do. Truly magnificent. Your body can contain so much chakra. I must make you part of my collection. It was at this time that the owner of the voice made himself known. He appeared on the opposite end of the street among the puppet wreckage. He was a man with wide grayish-brown eyes and short, mousy red hair. He wore the Suna flak jacket with a sleeveless undershirt, bandages around both arms, brown pants with an attached holster, and brown shinobi sandals. The puppet ninja force created by Mokade were exquisite masterpieces of art. Sasori began as he spread his fingers, thin chakra strings attaching to the scattered remains of the puppets. It's a pity he couldn't appreciate them and ended up dying. Thankfully, he left more than enough spare parts for me to use. He stopped and smiled before moving his hands and twitching his fingers. Immediately after, the puppet pieces flew together and began to pile and merge with one another. I'll leave the next few seconds to you, I told them before taking out 2 kunai and stabbing one on either side of me. Itachi nodded. Rin smiled. Let's show him Itachi. Itachi looked to her and smiled in kind before activating his Sharingan. With that, they took off. 2 hand seals was all it took before Itachi puffed his chest with air and exhaled a ball of fire at the scrap puppet pieces. An explosion of fire followed by a wave of heat resulted from his attack connecting. Rin followed behind as she dashed across the roofs of the buildings before she jumped up. Her hand seals rapidly formed before she puffed her cheeks and spit out a giant blob of water in the air. It paused as it reached its apex before lances of water shot out from it towards the smokescreen caused by Itachi's attack. The earth trembled and dust picked up as Itachi and Rin leaped back and watched in seriousness as the dust from their attacks began to clear. And Uchiha? A voice said from within the smoke as it dissipated. I suppose I could add you as well. The smoke finally dissipated, showcasing a massive unharmed centipede-like puppet body. In the past, Mokade used this city's underground chakra vein to power this beautiful puppet, Sasori stated as he stood on the head of the doll. And that was why he was a failure as a puppeteer. He used external means to supply his abilities and was much too weak and unqualified to do it on his own. With that said, Sasori uncrossed his hands, the chakra strings connecting them to the giant puppet causing it to move. With a roar, the puppet raised its hand and slammed the ground, causing the earth to tremble as a shockwave spread outwards. The turbulent winds caused Itachi and Rin to leap back a couple of paces before they stabilized themselves. Sasori smiled. Go! The beast roared before its mouth glowed as it gathered chakra before it shot out a beam of immense energy out of its mouth. Its head turned as it indiscriminately attacked the rest of the city along with its targets. Rin and Itachi jumped up from the smoke. The former looked below with a serious gaze before a cloak of red chakra in the form of a turtle with 3 flat tails began to cover her form. Not a moment sooner did she flip through a few hand seals. Water style, water dragon bullet jutsu. With her bijuu's aid, the moisture in the air rapidly gathered behind her and formed an immense pillar of water in the shape of a dragon. Its yellow eyes gleamed as it looked below before it roared and dashed downwards to attack. Itachi didn't idle as he shot a powerful beam of electricity into the dragon, causing it to glitter in lightning as it continued its descent. With its large size, the puppet was forced to confront the attack head-on as it blasted a beam of concentrated chakra at the lightning-covered water dragon. Unfortunately, the added chakra from Rin's bijuu was more than enough for the water dragon to overpower it. With an explosion of energy, it came crashing down on the puppet, causing cracks to spread outward. The puppet below lay damaged from the attack and it groaned as it struggled to stand. But it didn't end. With gravity doing its job, Rin began to descend towards the puppet. She cocked her hand back and right as she lashed out, I felt her gather a sufficient amount of chakra on her fist. With a short shout, her fist hit the puppet squarely on the head, caving it in. The impact caused a shockwave to spread through the surroundings and the ground to cave in. Cracks spread all around as the earth collapsed in on itself, with the nearby buildings breaking down from their destabilized structure. I raised a brow as the dust and debris from the impact expanded. What exactly did Tsunade teach that girl? It seems like my affinity for this work of art isn't high, Sasori said in slight disappointment. However, he looked to Rin with a grin. A Jinchuriki as well. You 3 will more than make up for my losses. A terribly foreboding feeling welled up from within me. Without warning, spears of iron sand shot out from the ground beneath Itachi, Rin, and me. Time slowed down in my perception as I threw the 2 kunai beside me in the air before I leaped back. I could see the iron spears inching closer to Itachi and Rin. I could smell the dangerous poison laced on the projectiles. I could tell that Itachi and Rin would have a hard time dodging these attacks. Despite this, I remained calm. Amanoto Kotachi, heaven. In a flash, the 2 kunai I had thrown were replaced with Itachi and Rin respectively. Soon after, the kunai were shredded to shrapnel from the iron sand attack. Itachi and Rin quickly gained their bearings and flipped back before softly landing on the ground to my either side. Rin breathed heavily before looking at me in wonder. What was that? A project I'd been working on for a while, I replied simply. A few years back, when I had memorized Minato's Flying Thunder God technique notes, I had already begun to formalize something similar of my own. It came with its advantages and disadvantages, but those could be explained at a later date. We have company, Itachi stated. No sooner did an iron spike shoot out from below us, which we hurriedly dodged by jumping back. The attack didn't end and more spikes emerged and traveled towards us. We leaped backward from rooftop to rooftop, each building soon being devastated by the iron spikes. We gained significant distance and I took the time to observe the landscape, noting how it had drastically changed with iron spikes jutting out everywhere. Don't let those touch you, I said. They're laced. Their bodies straightened in seriousness before laughter sounded out. In the sky on a cloud of iron sand, Sasori sat with his arms in the air as he controlled a puppet with short black hair reaching its shoulders, yellow eyes, and a gray overcoat. This is my most prized work of art. The effort that it took to capture him was so well worth it. Rin's eyes widened. Is that the third Kazekage? Itachi finished as his Sharingan eyes narrowed. I nodded. It looks like the information was correct. Sasori of the Red Sand killed his own Kage and turned him into a puppet. I stood up and cracked the joints in my fingers. Now we have no choice but to engage. My eyes glowed as I activated deconstructive analysis while I simultaneously activated accelerated analysis and also used my other mind from parallel processes. My perception of time slowed to a crawl. I pulled out a kunai attached to a string and placed my Minato Kotachi mark on it. Lightning coursed through my hand and fell onto the blade before I threw it. Hard. The sound was deafening as the blade traveled through the air towards Sasori at speeds that easily caused it to catch fire from the friction. Despite this, in my gaze, the knife moved slowly. I could see Sasori's serious visage as he controlled his puppet, releasing a wave of chakra that adhered to the iron spikes. They moved to intercept my kunai, however, their movements were captured in my eyes. The velocity of the knife, the wind resistance of the air, tension of the string, and the angles of the iron spikes were all calculated rapidly by my second brain. Every twitch I made to my fingers was calculated to give my kunai the most optimal flight path towards its destination as I caused it to weave through the jutting iron spears. Sasori widened his eyes as he hurriedly formed an iron barrier, however, my lighting shot through it like a beam, melting the edges of the hole it made. Still, with his incredible experience, Sasori was able to tilt his head just enough for my kunai to just barely graze his cheek. A Rasengan formed on my hand. Minato Kotachi. Spacetime distorted as I vanished from my initial position and appeared right behind Sasori, my kunai changing positions with me. The spiraling ball of energy on my palm slowly inched its way towards Sasori. And then, I felt it. An immense sense of danger blared within my mind. The third Kazekage puppet suddenly shot out a black iron knife from a hidden compartment within it. I could easily see it coming, however, if I chose to dodge now, I wouldn't get this chance again. So, I didn't. The blade pierced my back and exited through my chest. Despite that, I drilled the Rasengan into Sasori's back, knocking him off the iron sand cloud. His momentary incapacitation caused the iron sand below my feet to dissipate and gravity to take over. At the same moment, the kunai I had switched myself with had kept its momentum and once more traveled in this direction before passing over us and flying overhead. I sighed and thought to myself as I fell to the ground below. Just as I was showing off my new technique, I get stabbed through the heart because of it. At that moment, I felt for another Minato Kotachi connection and tried to move there. And then I realized I couldn't control my chakra. You've been afflicted by a powerful poison. Decreases HP by 500 per second. Decreases CC by 100%. Due to toxin resistance, HP is decreased by 50 per second. Due to toxin resistance, CC is decreased by 10%. It was the sudden feeling of not having perfect control of my chakra that threw me off. It was like suddenly losing your limb out of nowhere and trying to walk without realizing you had lost it. It was because of this feeling that at that instant, I was unable to use my chakra. I looked to the sky. Why have you forsaken me? An iron spike on the ground rammed through my stomach, the sickening sound of flesh tearing resulting from the impact. I coughed up a glob of blood, but that was inconsequential compared to the immense pain my body felt. To think you hadn't instantly died from that attack and the poison. Sasori stated as he grinned despite the blood pouring from his back. You're a little roughed up, but I can fix you up nicely. My vision somewhat blurred as the poison worked its way through my body. Congratulations! Toxin resistance has leveled up by 1. Fantastic! I thought blandly as I gazed at him before turning my head to Itachi and Rin. They were frozen. I could make out Rin's horrified expression while Itachi's eyes were widened. Yeah, I probably don't look to be in good shape right around now. I would tell them to take this opportunity to attack, however, that would clearly alert the enemy and make it obsolete. Plus, they looked shocked and probably wouldn't register my words anyway. Then there was the fact that my lung was punctured through, so doing anything that required air would be quite difficult for a few more moments. Looks like I'll have to continue myself. Even in my condition, I was still fine and my regeneration would be able to keep the poison at bay in addition to my toxin resistance. Before you're reborn as an immortal masterpiece. Sasori began as he shakily stood up, eyeing me with a crazed smile. You first have to die. He spread his arms with a smile and controlled his puppet to move. At the same moment, I was about to pull the iron spike out of my gut. And then, we both stopped. Chakra signatures spiked to immense levels. A beast roared which shook the skies. Sasori paused his attack with wide eyes and looked to the source only to see an orange ethereal armored warrior surrounding Itachi. Next to him stood the Three Tails. Sasori whispered before taking a step back. He looked back at Itachi. What the hell is that? There was no one to answer him as the ethereal warrior lifted up his sword. The three tails began to gather an extremely dense amount of chakra within its mouth. My eyes lingered on the two behemoths radiating immense amounts of energy. I blinked. Yeah, they got this. I then focused on Sasori's tense look and thought about attacking him, but I gave up that thought soon after. The amount of chakra Rin and Itachi were gathering was quite large and I would definitely get caught in the crossfire if I decided to interfere. I decided that the next best thing for me to do then would be to simply vanish to a different spot. Why? Well, for one, I didn't want Sasori to take me hostage and use me against Itachi and Rin. Plus, I was interested in what type of abilities they had. With that thought, I found a kunai marker for my Yamanoto Kotachi technique nearby and immediately flashed there before looking down below at the battle that would soon commence. Yoru, gamer. Third-person POV. Neither Itachi nor Rin really knew what happened. One moment their partner and friend were next to them. The next moment he was gone, the kunai he had thrown earlier replacing his position. The fact that the kunai still flew forward did not even register in their minds as they watched Yoru get stabbed through the stomach. Despite this, he carried out his duty and landed his attack on the enemy, causing him severe damage. That should have been it. They didn't know what happened. Yoru should have been able to use his ability to teleport back, but he didn't. The floating iron cloud lost its cohesiveness as soon as Sasori lost control and caused Yoru to tumble down. They wanted to yell at him to move, however, they could only stand frozen in shock as he became impaled through the chest from a stray iron shard on the ground. Itachi couldn't breathe. The scene of a past mission played within his mind. The death of one of his friends at the hands of that masked man. The despair he felt when his mission objectives had been slaughtered in front of him reappeared. He hadn't been able to do a single thing. Why had he been left to live? Why had his friends died? Why hadn't he been able to protect them? The situation replayed in his mind, his friend's body overlapping with Yoru's corpse. The powerlessness he felt. The pain he felt. Itachi didn't know what made him say it or where it had come from, but from the depths of his mind, a name appeared. Instinctively, he knew what to do. And he spoke, Susanoo. A large orange skeletal projection of chakra appeared around his frame. Muscle wrapped around its bones. Skin wrapped around its muscles. Armor wrapped around its skin. With only its upper half visible, it raised its sword. Rin had watched Obito die in her arms. At that point, she had been powerless to do anything. When she had been forced to become the three-tailed Jinchuriki, she had tried to kill herself in order to protect her village. She had caused her own friend to impale her through the heart. She had expected to die. Who wouldn't? She never expected to survive and see her friends and family again. Her sensei and his wife. Their beautiful daughter Mito. Her friends at the academy. Kakashi. She would have never been able to see them again if not for Yoru. More so, she had made friends with her bijou, the thing she had been afraid would destroy her village. The coma she had been in had allowed her to talk to and understand him. It was all thanks to Yoru that she was able to continue holding on to what she loved and had even gained so much more. And now, he was dead. And again, she had been powerless to do anything. Just like with Obito, she could only watch. Her mind unconsciously sank deep within herself as she appeared on a beautiful sunlit beach. Tears streamed down her face as she gazed at the gigantic turtle-like creature. Iso-kun. Isabu shuffled unceasingly with giant beads of sweat, or water, streaming down his head. Please don't cry, Rin. The turtle knew what was going on outside, and while he didn't really care about the boy who was presumably dead, he really didn't want to see Rin cry. The girl in question looked at him teary-eyed and ran to hug his large fingers. Seeing Rin shudder in sadness, Isabu narrowed his one opened eye in anger. Rin, he said, causing the girl to look up at him. There's no need to cry, I'll help you. She sniffled and held back her tears before looking up at him with a firm gaze and nodding. Isabu's expression relaxed. Rin hugged his finger. Their minds synchronized. The orange Susanoo lowered its raised sword, causing the earth beneath to split as an energy wave shot out towards its target. Sasori hurriedly took to the skies on a cloud of iron sand and looked below. He gulped and looked to the distance to see that the ethereal monster's weapon had split the city of Roran in two. Instincts honed from years of shinobi training was the only thing that had allowed him to react at the tailed beast bomb that suddenly followed. He quickly used his chakra to form giant walls of iron sand while simultaneously moving out of the way. His chakra drained extensively at the ordeal, however, he was able to barely dodge the powerful beam of energy. The beam blasted through the iron barriers he had put up, slowing it down long enough for Sasori to move away. The attack exploded in the distance, completely leveling the mountain that had previously been erect there. Sweat crippled down his forehead. What are they? He thought while looking for an escape route, screw turning them into art. I need to live if in order to even do that. All I wanted to do was to get a few puppet pieces for my collection. He looked below. Wait, where the hell did he go? Wait, didn't that kid have an iron spike impaled through his body just a second ago? How could he have moved away? Well, there went his plan of using a hostage. He couldn't contemplate any further as the bijou suddenly slammed its hands on the ground. It took only a moment for Sasori to realize that large pieces of coral pierced through the earth from underneath and destroyed his spikes of iron sand. Damn it! Sasori thought as he took off to the air. Aerial escape it is, though I won't be able to do this for long. The amount of chakra it took to manipulate the third Kazekage's iron sand was immense, mainly due to the fact that he wasn't the third Kazekage and magnet release wasn't his Kekei Genkai. As a result, Sasori had a difficult time using the iron sand to its pinnacle. Before his plan could be completely put into motion, however, Itachi's Susanoo moved. Between its hands, it formed three Magatamas bound together by a single, circular thread of energy. Its shape allowed it to function as shuriken, which Itachi took advantage of as he immediately launched his most powerful long-ranged attack. Yasaka Magatama. Sasori couldn't dodge. His control of the third Kazekage's Kekei had become poor as he was running out of chakra. That wasn't even mentioning the fact that he was already quite heavily injured from the white-haired shinobi's last attack. He grits his teeth as pushed as much chakra as he could to form thick gigantic walls of iron sand. They barely proved useful as the Yasaka Magatama sliced through each wall one by one before arriving in front of Sasori. There was little time. Sasori reached into his holster where he held his puppet summoning scroll and quickly took it out before summoning his army of personal puppets. An explosion shook the battlefield. Sasori's form was launched out of the smoking cloud of debris before he roughly slammed against a wall of one of the buildings and fell down. His most prized third Kazekage puppet clattered beside him relatively unharmed. He chucked ruefully. This is how the tale of Sasori, of the Red Sand ends. He knew how bad his condition was right now. His back was torn open from the attack Yoro had inflicted on him earlier, he was out of chakra, and he had not come out of that last attack unscathed. A pool of glistening crimson blood pooled out beneath him, causing Sasori to smile. In the end, I died before I could turn myself into a beautiful everlasting work of art, however. He stared at his reflection in his pure red blood as it reflected the sunlight. Dying this way is actually quite beautiful as well. The battlefield was silent. Itachi could not hold the Susanoo armor for long due to his small chakra reserves and had only been able to do those 2 attacks before wearing out. The ethereal armor dissipated and Itachi began to sway as exhaustion overwhelmed him. Right as he was falling, a pair of lithe arms wrapped around him and held him up straight. His vision unfocused, he turned to see Rin looking at him with a sad smile. His expression became despondent. "Let's complete our mission." Rin nodded, knowing him, I'm sure that's what he would want. They walked on in silence as they approached the area where Sasori had fallen. As shinobi, they knew they couldn't really hate him. In all truth, they had technically trespassed into foreign territory. Forgetting the fact that Sasori had pretty much defected with his murder of the third Kazekage, he still had any and all right to defend himself against intruders to his home soil. Not to mention, it wasn't like they had come here with the intention of peacefully talking him out of releasing the third Kazekage's corpse. "I'll do it," Rin said as she approached the third Kazekage puppet before taking out a storage seal. With a little application of chakra, a beautifully decorated and elaborate coffin. Rin's expression soured, such a beautiful thing for a puppet yet. She shook her head and carefully placed the third Kazekage's puppet body into the coffin and resealed it in the scroll. Next, she looked at Sasori. Rin was a kind-hearted individual, and while she definitely didn't like Sasori by any stretch of the imagination, she felt it was wrong to simply leave him bleeding here. While he had betrayed Sand, they were still Konoha's allies, and so Rin felt it would be best to have them deal with him. She took out another storage scroll that was on her person and placed his corpse within. She looked to Itachi, who nodded in agreement. With that, they made their way over to the area in which Yoro had died. Then they noticed an oddity. "Where did his body go?" Itachi asked. Rin had no idea what to say. Itachi activated his Sharingan despite his protesting eyes and looked around. Then he stopped. He sighed and sat down on the ground before speaking out loud. "Yoru, please come down." Yoru, gamer. Yoru POV. I looked down below where Itachi was sitting on the ground while Rin was looking up every which way for my shadow. "I suppose I should," I thought as I heard Itachi. I promptly jumped off the building I was on before landing in front of the Duoyo. Itachi remained silent. Rin was looking at me with an upset gaze. I idly scratched the back of my head. "Good job, team." Rin almost looked to be on the verge of tears. I looked at her and patted her head somewhat awkwardly. "Aren't you such a kind soul? Preserving the body of your enemy like that." She looked downwards before her body trembled. I thought you died. I was so upset." "Rin," I said, making her look at me. "I'm not so easy to kill. As you can see, I'm still alive." She froze before immediately hugging me. "Please don't worry me like that again. I don't want to lose anyone else anymore." I idly patted her head since I wasn't necessarily the best with comforting people. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Itachi give me a subtle thumbs up. I internally rolled my eyes. "Thank you for worrying about me," I said as Rin leaned away from me and wiped a tear. "May I take a look?" Rin blinked before understanding and nodding her head. She took out a scroll and spread it out before a coffin appeared, which she promptly opened. I looked into it. All this trouble for what is now essentially a pile of wood. I shook my head and looked at the third Kazekage puppet before I internally smiled. I immediately snatched up a strand of his hair and put it in my inventory before looking at Rin and Itachi. "We're all set." They nodded. "Now then, time to inform Minato." Yoru, gamer. Third-person POV Suna/Konoha meeting point. The tension in the atmosphere was so thick that it almost felt like you could touch it. The fourth Hokage and the fourth Kazekage stood on opposite ends of the canyon that separated their two forces. On Suna's end, there were many powerful chakra cannons that were lined up while the Kazekage floated on his gold dust cloud in front of his forces. On Konoha's end, the Hokage stood tall as the wind caused his cloak to wave in the air. As a show of goodwill, they didn't have weapons pointed. However, that didn't mean Minato was foolish enough to come here without a contingency plan. He just hoped he wouldn't have to use it. Minato Namikaze. Raza, the fourth Kazekage, spoke with his arms crossed as he floated on his golden dust cloud. At this stage, there is little else that could be said between us. With the situation as is, you can't blame me for being afraid of Suna's best interests. Don't be so hasty, Minato said calmly. The situation is in and of itself a misunderstanding, but I know that won't appease you, so I've scheduled for something to be brought back to you. Raza frowned. There's very little that would move me at this time, Yondaime. I wouldn't be too sure if I were you, Minato stated with a smile. Give if a little time. Raza remained silent, tacitly in agreement. Time passed by. The tension on both ends began to make the soldiers slightly restless in discomfort. More time passed. Someone sneezed. Everyone whipped their heads at the individual in question, causing the poor Suna-nin to sweat in discomfort. It's just a little sandy out here and I'm allergic to dust. Everyone's faces turned black. How are you allergic to dust when you live in the middle of a desert? Everyone thought it. Neither said it. They had to remain professional after all. The tension eased somewhat and the time continued to pass. Raza sighed. With all due respect, Yondaime, I'm usually a patient individual, but if we're going to have to wait any longer. Minato opened his mouth to reply. Then he stopped. And smiled. That won't be the case. Before Raza could refute, a flash appeared on Konoha's end, causing both sides to tense, but before anything happened, the flash revealed itself to be another Minato in addition to three young individuals. The clone Minato nodded and poofed into a cloud of smoke. Raza looked on carefully. They are. Minato merely smiled and looked at him, here to deliver something to Suna. Yoru POV. So that's the fourth Kazekage. I thought as I looked at the individual on the opposite end of the canyon who was floating on a cloud of gold dust. I wondered how much that cost. Yoru, Minato stated, looking at me. I nodded and looked to Rin, who took out a paper storage seal and ran chakra through it. It poofed before dropping an elaborately decorated coffin on the ground. Minato spoke. Not too long ago, our sources managed to track down some information about your third Kazekage. Raza's eyes widened. Minato continued. I know how much Suna has been looking for any information about him. Unfortunately, we found out that he had already been killed. Despite this, we figured that you would at the very least want to have some respite. Raza floated down towards the coffin at the opposite end of the canyon. I decided to say something for everyone's benefit. His corpse wasn't really in the most ideal situation. Raza narrowed his eyes. What do you mean? Rin stepped forward and placed a storage scroll on top of the coffin. We had to fight Sasori of the Red Sand, who had turned the third Kazekage's corpse into a puppet. His body is sealed within. I could sense surprise emanating from the individuals around us. Whether it was from the fact that Sasori had killed the Kazekage, we had killed Sasori, or both, I was not sure. Did you just say that my grandson is dead? An elderly female voice sounded out. The crowd of Suna-nin split, giving way to an elderly woman. She looked at Itachi, Rin, and I carefully, as if trying to remember our faces. Before speaking, I want to see his body. Raza nodded before the coffin began to levitate. A gold-rimmed coffin? He asked as he looked at Minato. Part of our sincerity, was his reply. In my opinion, I was pretty sure they only did that because Raza used gold dust and could levitate the coffin away. If he had been able to use a different element, I was pretty certain we wouldn't have wasted money on a gold-rimmed coffin. After the coffin arrived in Suna's end, the lid was opened, allowing every individual there to see. It's true. One Sand Shinobi stated. It's really the body of the third. Chio frowned. How can this even be considered a body anymore? It's been defiled nearly beyond recognition. She shook her head before taking the scroll from the coffin lid and splaying it on the ground. With a cloud of smoke, the body Sasori appeared on the ground, his arms crossed on his chest and his gaze peaceful. Chio looked at her grandson for a while before gently stroking his hair. At least you'll be with your mother and father again, she said. After gazing at his dead body for a while longer, she sighed before resealing his body and looking to the fourth Kazekage with a nod. Raza turned to look at us before saying, Tsunegakure will remember this moment of goodwill from the leaf. I pray that our partnerships remain secure for the foreseeable future. Of course. Minato said with a smile. I'll be always glad to work with our friends from the sand. Ping. Quest complete. Red Iron Sand. Reward, 250,000 EXP. You have level up by 1. Raza smirked and began to fly away, leading his army with him as they moved back. Minato sighed, one issue averted. He looked towards us with a smile. I knew you all could do it. Thank you. That was no issue, I replied. Minato smiled for a moment before his expression became serious again. Unfortunately, we still have another prevalent matter to attend to. Minato looked to the sky before sighing. Jericho's ritual requires the energy produced by the sun during the solar eclipse, but we still don't know what his fifth Kekkai Genkai will be. There's not much use thinking about it. Jiraiya's voice sounded out as he appeared beside Minato and placed a hand on his shoulder. In any event, the only opportunity he'll have is tomorrow when the solar eclipse appears. Till then we only need to keep our eyes peeled around Entishumasen. Minato sighed in exhaustion and nodded before looking at us. Well, let's get you all home. He created a clone and had it attend to us as we formed a point of contact with it before the scenery suddenly changed. Thanks again you all, Minato's clone said with a smile. I'll make sure you all are compensated. And with that, he disappeared in a puff. We found ourselves in the middle of the village and with nothing to do, I pointed to the ramen shop that was right beside us. Why don't we all get something to eat? It's been quite a day and it'll all be on me. Why not? I suppose so, was their reply. I walked over and opened the flap of the store before calling out to the store owner. Tucci, 3 bowls of the usual. A voice sounded out from the back of the store. Tucci walked out with a towel in hand as he looked at us before smiling. Ah, it's Yoru. And you even brought your friends. You know, I was beginning to worry you didn't have any. Rin chuckled. Itachi looked mildly amused. Just bring the food, I said before sitting down on the stool in front of the counter. No problem, he said with a chuckle before moving to the back of the room. Rin sat on my left, Itachi on my right. We remained in relative silence, the sound of shuffling footsteps and conversation from the outside the store wholly prevalent. How are you still alive? Rin asked, breaking the quiet atmosphere. It almost sounds you want me dead. You know what I mean. I saw you get stabbed through dash. Some refreshments, Tucci said as he placed 3 glasses of water in front of us before going back to his cooking. I took a sip of water and looked at my reflection in the water. The simplest answer would be my bloodline limit kept me alive. Both Rin and Itachi looked at me in surprise. Bloodline? Itachi asked. What kind of bloodline would allow you to survive getting stabbed through the heart? How to explain this? I thought while swirling my cup. Imagine my body can take a certain amount of damage before I die. What matters isn't really where the damage occurs, but how much damage occurs. Stabbing me through the stomach and stabbing me through the leg would cause the same amount of damage to my body, even though for normal individuals, a stab through the gut would be much more fatal. Of course, it's slightly more complicated than that, but that's the gist of it. That's... Rin began in surprise. Itachi looked at me. So, you don't have any weak points? Not necessarily. I said before downing the cup of water and placing it down on the counter. If you crush my heart, I'll take much more damage. Furthermore, I'm not sure if I can survive without my head, and I truly don't want to find out. Aside from those obvious weaknesses, the only way to kill me would be hit me enough that my body's natural regeneration is unable to heal me in time. Oh yeah, I also have a healing factor. Rin frowned. Is that why you let yourself get stabbed? Then why didn't you simply use the technique you used on Itachi and me earlier when you were falling? Ah, that. I said ruefully. Sasori had poisoned the iron, and the poison had prevented me from using my chakra effectively at that moment. Rin's eyes widened. Wait, poison? Are you alright? I'll be alright, though I still can't use my chakra 100%. How is that alright? She said, looking at me seriously. We should get you checked out before it leaves permanent lasting effects. I shook my head. My body can heal itself of all negative status conditions as long as I get some sleep. Ah, I guess that's another facet to my bloodline. We lapsed into another round of silence. 3 bowls of beef ramen. Tucci said with a grin as he placed the bowls in front of us. Please take your time and enjoy. Thank you. We said. Tucci nodded before attending to another customer. I split the chopsticks apart and gave a mental thank you for the meal before taking in a strand of noodles. Even though I didn't need to, I blew on it a little bit before eating a few strands. Takoyaki is still better though. Enough about me. I said, looking at Itachi. What exactly was that thing you pulled? Don't tell me it's actually part of your bloodline. I could recall the chakra mutation that had occurred in Itachi before he pulled out that orange armored avatar. Most importantly, however, was the fact that I had felt a very similar fluctuation in chakra before. In Kakashi. I believe so. He said quietly. I watched his contemplative expression and saw that he didn't really want to say anymore. I patted his head. If you can't say it, then that's fine. It'll be something between us 3. Itachi calmly removed my hand from his head. I smirked before my expression turned serious. Speaking of. I said, looking at Rin, you showed off your bijou dash. She frowned. Fine Isokuan. She smiled. During our mission. Rin stayed silent for a moment. I patted her head. Don't worry about it, but you should be more careful. The other villages don't know who is in possession of the 3 tails, and we want to keep it that way. We all spoke quietly enough that only we could hear each other. She nodded, but then sulked. Why are you comforting me like I'm a kid? I'm older than you. I removed my hand before looking back at my noodle bowl and grabbing my chopsticks. Whatever happened during that mission involves secrets that we either rather not talk about. I looked at Itachi. Or ones that we should not talk about. I looked at Rin. We will keep these to ourselves. Itachi nodded and looked at Rin. No one will hear anything from me. Likewise. She replied with a smile. I downed my bowl of ramen before placing it on the counter and wiping my mouth. Then we are in agreement. Tucci. Yes, yes. The man said as he came over to us. I pulled out a stack of money and placed it on the counter. Thanks for the meal. Everyone looked at the money wide-eyed. That's a little much, Yoru. Tucci said with a strained smile. I observed him carefully before nodding. You're an honest guy and the meals were delicious, so think of the extra as a tip. Besides, I'm rich. I see, he said with a sigh before taking my money. The next meal you get will be on the house. I opened my mouth. No buts. I closed my mouth. Around this time, Itachi and Rin had finished off their meals. Thank you for the meal, Mr. Tucci, Rin said brightly as she placed the bowl down and got off the chair. Likewise, the meal was delicious, Itachi said before following suit. I stood up last. I'll see you around, Tucci. He chuckled, likewise Yoru. Stay safe and tell my favorite regular hi for me. Will do, I replied before walking out the shop, Rin and Itachi in tow. The streets were still somewhat busy with people walking to and fro and shop owners pitching their sales. This is where we split up, I said, looking at the both of them. Thank you for coming with me on the mission. It would have been much more troublesome otherwise. Of course. HN. I couldn't help but slightly smile. I'll see you all later. With that, we all went our separate ways. That's it for this reading. Hit like and subscribe for a free ticket pass going to the different worlds of anime fanfiction. Looking forward to having you on board again.